Okay, so we were just talking about discovery. So you're starting the project, you have some inspiration, and now you're addressing your user needs and collecting all of your information. Then you are converging and you're focusing in on one aspect that you're going to be able to address with this project. People might come to you and have this huge project and you just can't address them all at once, or maybe it's just not possible within the timeline to address everything they want. And so you have to make some decisions about what you need to focus on. So that's where the converging comes in. What are you going to focus on? And then afterwards, in the next phase of develop, we go to divergent thinking again. So we are expanding, we're opening it up to new ideas. This is based on what your users have told you they need, and you are thinking about ideas and you're generating ideas about what possibly could be a solution. The more ideas you have, the better. And then we move to deliver, which is the final phase, where we are now, again, focusing in and selecting an idea, developing a prototype, testing it. So this process, it's all about that divergent, convergent thinking. And you may have heard this before, and it's really important to go through those phases and to open yourself up to new ideas and information, but also just as important to focus in on what you can accomplish in the project that you've been asked to do. So one of the biggest factors in both of these approaches for design thinking is, as I mentioned, empathy. You really need to talk to people. You need to understand what their needs are. You have to talk to your audience, the actual people who will be using the product you're designing, as close to them as you can get. And then once you've mapped out a plan to learn from your users, so how are you going to talk to them? Are you going to interview them? Are you going to do some kind of survey? I'm not a fan of surveys. I think that is much better to talk to someone or have a qualitative, really open-ended kind of format, so you can learn all those little things that you didn't know to ask about, because people will tell you things that you may not have even considered. So being live with them and talking to them, or being in their space and having them take you on a tour of their space, depending on how it applies to your project, it's really, really valuable. So talking to people is number one, and this is in line with our empathize phase. So design thinking, what it does is it provides insight on the why of a scenario. Why do people do something or need something or have an opinion specifically about something? It also provides how. How do they usually do their banking? How do they shop for groceries? So to access this, we need that qualitative data. And, a lot of marketing is based on quantitative data, which is looking at how many and how often. And these are valuable pieces of information as well. But without the qualitative side, which tells you why and how, you're really missing half of the picture. So for example, have you ever been asked, and you can put your hand up in Zoom, have you ever been asked to take a survey maybe on Instagram or at a store after you leave? They ask you, out of 5, how would you rate your experience? Or how satisfied are you with your experience? And you have to, I said 1 or a 5, and you pick a number. So sure, you think maybe that'll tell me a lot. But really, when you think about it, what does satisfying mean to you? For people, it might be different. Are you satisfied with your experience? Yes. So I saw a hand go up. Someone has had to do a survey like that. Yes. So depending on what your criteria for satisfied is, you could be ranking your experience on completely different factors than someone else. And so that's sort of problematic, because it doesn't really give you a good baseline for understanding what the actual customers are needing in this scenario. So satisfying is tricky. Like, it would be much better probably to have an open box for people to share their comments. Like what was satisfying for you about your visit to our website or to our store? And maybe someone would say, you know what? It was clean, it was bright, the people were really helpful, but you didn't have the things that I had in stock. So maybe they were satisfied with the store being a nice space, but they weren't satisfied with the selection of the products they were looking for. So it gets really complex. And so the qualitative approach really helps to answer those questions. So as you are moving through the design thinking process, one of the early things that you also have to do is think about how you're going to frame your problem. So, we have learned from our hotel CEO, for example, he wants to design a bed. And how many people are you probably familiar with the how might we question? So this is the sort of a guiding question of how you're going to conduct research and design. So if your hotel CEO asks you for the bed, the how might we design question, the how might we question might be, how might we design a bed so comfortable that it makes guests choose our hotel over other brands? So that's okay, it's a good start, but it's important to think at this stage, why that is your question. Why do you need to know that? Why do you want to design that? And a lot of the time we get caught up in creating a really specific product or a solution without asking ourselves if it's the right solution for our users. So the CEO, and this often comes from the top down, we need to design this, we need this thing. And you as a designer, as a UX researcher, your job is to say, well, okay, great, thank you. This is a great start, but let's talk to our users. Let's talk to our hotel guests and find out, what do they actually need to make them come back to us over and over? So by asking ourselves why, after your first draft of your how might we question, learning about your motivations, what do you really want to do in this scenario, you can expand on that a little bit more. So for the hotel CEO, focusing on that bed, and as we saw when we talked about relaxation versus the bed, that might be too narrow of a goal. So perhaps it would be better to focus on creating a memorable, positive experience. Like, what do we actually want from our customers? Well, we want them to keep coming back. We want them to feel taken care of. We want them to feel positive memories from this experience. So, you're not going to know what they actually need, though, until you talk to them. So I think I have it written on another slide. I do. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. I'll give you an example, though, of where this has actually been applied in the past. So the how might we question was developed, and you can see the full video online if you search, and I'll send this to Amir after. It's MX 2011, Charles Warren. And there's a little video, it's about 5 minutes long. So I'll forward that along so you can check that out afterwards if you're interested. But Charles Warren is a user experience leader, formerly at Google, and he shared this story back in 2011 at a conference. So back in the 70s, Irish Spring, which is a soap company, they make soap, there's a picture of soap on the screen. They came out with a revolutionary soap, and it had this green deodorant stripe in the center. And Procter & Gamble, who was their competitor, they were scrambling to keep up. So there was this Canadian working for Procter & Gamble. His name was Min Basadeur. And he did some research into brainstorming techniques, and he noticed that they all started with an open-ended question. How can we do this? How could this, blah, blah, blah. So he rephrased it to how might we, and then he posed it to his team, and he asked them, what is their design goal? And they said, well, we want to make a better green soap than the other guys. And so then he asked the most important question, which is, why? Why do you want to do that? And so answers included things like they're related to the competitor. We want to beat the competitor. We want to grow our market value. We want to enter a new market. But then there was one answer that was a little bit deeper, which was, we want to make a more refreshing soap, which is so much more valuable than just making something to beat the other guy, making a better product. We want to make a more refreshing soap. So that changes the question from how might we make a better green strip soap like the other guy, to how might we make a more refreshing soap in general. And it opens you up to new design possibilities. You're not focusing narrowly on this one area. You are now exploring lots of different things that could solve that challenge for you. So maybe the solution isn't a deodorant stripe in the middle of the soap. Maybe it's something totally different. So the next question that Min asked was, okay, what's stopping you? So these are good questions to ask yourself. Develop your how might we question and reflect on it. Why do I want to do that? And maybe there's a deeper answer there. What's underlying your motivations for that question? And when you address that, then you can ask yourself, okay, what's stopping me? Why can't I do that yet? So if we apply this back to our hotel CEO bed, so the power of why, right? So if your design goal originally was, how might we design a bed so comfortable our hotel guests keep coming back, they choose us over other brands. Why do you want to do that? Well, maybe you want your guests to be comfortable, you want to feel relaxed, have positive memories, so they're going to think of you next time because they had a really good experience. Well, if you know that that's your driving motivation, you can rephrase that to say, okay, how might we create a comfortable, relaxing, and positive experience for our hotel guests? And then asking yourself, what's stopping you? Well, understanding your user needs, looking at budget, maybe there's infrastructure. So once you can identify where your limitations are, you can start designing within them or find out ways to work around them. So I want to go and do another little activity here. Just get to the next one. So before you can talk to your users, it's really important to identify all the stakeholders that are related to your product or your design solution. So this is a short activity, and we'll just do this in the chat. I think it'll be a little bit easier. So maybe together, and you can feel free to unmute yourself, because I don't think we have enough time to go into breakout rooms, but I'd like you to think about, here we have an example of a hospital gown. So I chose this example. I previously worked in design in healthcare, but this is something I think everyone can relate to in some way. Everyone has either seen a hospital gown, either in the media, or maybe a family member has been ill. Maybe you've been in the hospital yourself. If you know, there's lots of reasons we might have encountered a hospital gown. So it's a pretty commonly seen garment product. And I'd like you to think about how you'd approach a research project, a design project, that is looking to redesign the hospital gown. So I don't want you to design things. I don't want you to think about solutions yet. I want you to think about who you would need to talk to. Who do you need to understand experiences of in order to start thinking about your designs? Who are the people involved with the hospital gown? So you can drop them into the chat. I will just open the chat. Let me take them. Oh. Okay, so in the chat, and I don't know if I put the chat on, no, I'll just call it out. So we have some answers. So the radiologists, yep, doctors, the patients, of course, doctors, nurse, yes, patients, of course, they're going to be wearing the gown. Caregiver, great. So caregiver could be in the hospital, but also a family member or a friend or someone who is a paid person to help someone else. I know my grandmother has a caregiver that comes to her home, and she's not a nurse, but she helps in the house. Managers, yeah, fantastic. Who else is involved with this hospital gown? What happens when the gown gets dirty? Where does it go? Patients, doctors, and staff. It goes in the bin. If it's disposable, yes, it'll go in the bin, but a lot are also washable. So it might go down to the laundry facilities. It might be sterilized so that it can be used again. What about the people who make the gown? So the people who actually, if it's sewn, they're sewing it together. Maybe the people who are weaving the fabric. Marketing is another great example of stakeholders, right? So we have a huge network of people that are in some way connected to this one product. So getting as much information from the people who are going to be affected by a change in the design is going to help you design the right solution that works for everyone involved. Because if you only consider the patient, that could make the doctor's job really hard. If you only consider the doctor, it can make the patients really, I mean, the gown, I had a minor surgery recently and I had to wear a gown, and they're not fun to wear. You feel really vulnerable, and it's just, you know, it's just, it's not great. So there's a lot of things to be desired with the hospital gown. But if I was just designing for myself, I might not meet the needs of everyone else who needs to have something to do with the gown. So it's important to explore the other folks involved. So jumping ahead, we'll skip that one. So now that we've identified a lot of the important people who have good insights with how a hospital gown is used, the next thing we need to do is figure out, how do we tap into that knowledge? So as I mentioned before, talking to people, empathizing with them. These are all things that we need to do to really gain that understanding. And so for the rest of the presentation here, I have a number of methods to do that, to gain understanding of your actual users, which may vary depending on what you're designing for. So right now I'm designing a lot of digital space products. So some of these are not as applicable. Other times, if you are designing physical products, it would be different. So take this with a grain of salt. So you need to decide, what do you need to learn from these people? What do you need to know about their experience? And this book, Universal Methods of Design, it's 125 ways to research complex problems, develop innovative ideas, and design effective solutions, is a fantastic book that has so many great ideas of how to go about designing, getting information, organizing your information, all this stuff. So I highly recommend this book. I've used it a ton over the years. So that I'll send all this information to Mira afterwards. So jumping right in. So immersive observation techniques. So observation, so we're talking about ethnographic research is when we immerse ourselves in our user's environment and we try to understand their experiences by being there and being part of it. So there's 3 approaches here. The first one is a fly on the wall, and this is actually quite difficult. So this is a direct observation, fly on the wall / direct observation. This is observing without communicating or interacting with whoever you are studying, whoever you want to know about. And it's really difficult to do. You need a proper form. You need to be able to really strategically and systematically take notes and observe what you're seeing. And because you can't talk to people, this is not an appropriate method when you need to understand why they're doing something. You might do this if you want to see where they are going, or what they are reaching for, or how, where they're clicking on a website, but you won't understand why. So direct observation is good for certain things and not for others. Participant observation is when you become start doing what the people you are observing are doing. So in the middle photo, this is a photo of Patricia Moore, and she dressed up, she had all these personas. She would dress up as women she wasn't in her 80s, but she disguised herself as a senior citizen and traveled on the trains. And she wanted to learn about the challenges facing elderly women, elderly people. And so she disguised herself to try and understand their experience. So she immersed herself. She became a participant in the activities that she was observing. So she experienced certain things, but she also was able to witness other things because she looked a certain way. Indirect observation, that's our photo here on the right. So indirect observation, sometimes you can't observe something, like maybe you want to know about what the astronauts are getting up to in space. And you can't fly up there with them, but you could maybe look at things that they took with them to look for wear patterns. For example, if you want to look at their space suits and say, oh, how did you use this? Maybe there's damage in certain areas, and you can observe things after the fact that could tell you some clues about how it was used. So observation takes practice. It sounds really easy, but it's actually quite difficult. And it's really important to become familiar with your user. You do need to talk to them in advance if you can, or people similar, and because that's going to help you understand where to look at and what to look for. If you walk into a scenario just completely unprepared, you're not going to know where to look at. You're not going to know what to look for. It's going to be really time consuming. So you have to do that research in advance. Another approach is enhanced interview techniques. So I've cited the things from that book, and you can look them up afterwards. So these are, the problem with interviews is that if you don't ask the right questions, you might be missing out on really important information. So these 2 approaches help you dig a little bit deeper and to really get at the actual issues of what's going on in the circumstances that you're studying. So probes is a good one. And, when we do usability testing, you're already including a probe because you're including a website or an app or whatever. I did a project where I redesigned police officers' cycling uniforms. So we had them test the uniform on their bike. And so they were using the garments and commenting on them. So probes are really valuable. They can be actual artifacts, or they can be tasks that assigned to participants while you're with them. So this is the example I was talking about for the police officer uniform. So they, in this, the police service approach some colleagues and myself, and we applied to do this study for them. And we met with a number of the officers, and we asked them to bring their old uniforms with them and to wear their current uniforms. And then we used those as a point of conversation. Tell me about this piece. Tell me what are the challenges with these shorts that you see here on the screen. Tell me, we looked at them to look at the wear patterns. Where were they worn out? And this was, I've highlighted there's these different areas that were problematic, but the one at the bottom stands out to me. This is a reflective strip. So when you're at nighttime, the lights reflect off the bands, and it was really noisy. So they said they sounded like crickets when they were walking down the street, because it was just swoosh, 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 making these noises. And we would not have known that if they hadn't brought this in. It may never have come up, because the item was there and they remembered to tell us about it. We didn't have to worry about asking the right question, because the probe did that for us. Another way of using probes is the actual environment. So this is called, it has many names. Contextual inquiries is one. Martin and Hannington call it a touchstone tour. So just as we can see that things can help us uncover this deep knowledge about people's experiences, environments can help us do this as well, because you might encounter something in an environment that you didn't think of before. And because you're there, you can ask about it. So I'll give you an example here. I did a study, as I mentioned, with some in the knitting industry, and I went to their factories, and they were taking me through, and we were talking about their job and their experience. And I noticed this book on the corner of the desk. And I said, oh, I have that book in my classroom where I teach. I used to teach textiles. And that opened up an entire conversation about, we have to educate our clients. It's a big problem, and it takes so much time. They don't know anything about textiles. It slows everything down. It was a huge problem. I didn't know to ask that, but because I saw the book there, it came up in our conversation. So being in the environment when you're talking to your users is so important. So now so many things are virtual. So doing this online, and if we're talking about websites, having your users show you around, maybe you're developing a banking website, maybe ask them to show you around how they navigate the website, share their screen. Maybe they don't want to share their banking information, but any website, they can walk you through it, and that becomes your probe. That's the environment, and you can ask questions based on what you see and what they do. So another approach, just an add-on to that. So the tour spaces, your contextual inquiry or your touchstone tour, this can be a large space or it can be a small space. It can be a building, it can be a park, but it could also be someone's pocket. Maybe you want to find out what nurses carry with them during their shift, and you can say, nurses, what's in your pocket? And so this is information that can be very useful depending on what you're trying to learn. The next one is, this is interactive investigative techniques. So this may not be as applicable to as many scenarios, but it's an interesting way to get insight about your users. So body mapping and co-design. And I'll just jump into the next slide to continue. I'm gonna go real fast. Has anyone seen this image before? So this image is, it's been around for many years. It's been illustrated many ways, but it depicts the communication between what the customer actually wants and how other people who are involved in the process are interpreting it. So I won't go through every single one, but I can share these slides afterwards if that's helpful. You can have a quick look if you're not already familiar. So it's humorous, and it just shows there's a really big opportunity for miscommunication. So a few things to help understand and really get into the mind of your users is, so body mapping. This was a method that was developed in South Africa to understand the experiences of women living with HIV. And it was used in a therapeutic context, but it's been adapted for research and into UX and design thinking and human-centered design for many other projects. So I did a study looking at the experiences of women who wore plus size clothing, and to understand how they felt about their experiences. These aren't things that you would necessarily think of to just offer in a conversation. It's not always going to come up. So asking someone to engage with something else can help them think and reflect and give you a little bit more information that you wouldn't have known to ask. So again, it's all about, if you don't know what to ask, you have to find ways for they can share this with you. So what happens is basically a body silhouette, you trace the outline of a person, so you can have people pair up, and then they work through their body map with markers and crafting things, and they write on the map, and they reflect on their experiences with your topic. So for me, it was experiences with clothing as a plus size person. And think about, your head, your arms, your body, your chest, your stomach, all the way down to your feet. What are memories and experiences? And it taps into all of this embodied knowledge, which can really help you empathize with your user. So depending on what you're designing, this can be a great way to, as an icebreaker, even work with your users. And maybe it can be contextual, it can be shrunk down. You can give them, it's funny, I just threw one out. You can give them a little small scale silhouette and just ask them to work with that. It doesn't have to be their own body. It's more powerful when it's their own body, but maybe you don't have time or resources. So that is one way to empathize. These are some of the body maps that were created in that research project. And another thing you can do is co-design, or co-creation, where you're actually asking your users to do the designing. Now, their designs are not going to go to market. They're not going to be produced that way. The point of the activity is, by giving them control, they can focus in on what's really important to them. And it's very insightful for you as the designer to say, oh, this is a theme. Maybe they keep saying the same thing. So in the same workshop with the plus size fashion, our participants, we said, we want you to design your ideal clothing. What do you want to see in the store? Like, what do you want to wear? And people started crafting. They used construction paper. Someone here is making, these are just a pair of blue jeans. And it just told us what was missing from the things that they had available to them at the time. And so it's a form of prototyping, because they are creating these little miniature drawings or crafted solutions and telling us what they really want. So it's another way of empathizing and connecting with your users. And throughout the slides, I've had these the 5 phases of the design thinking process up in the top corner to sort of reflect where they're at. But as I mentioned, it's messy. It goes back and forth, and sometimes things fall in different categories. So co-design, you're designing with your user as a way to gain insight for what their needs are. So how they, maybe it's a website you're designing, and maybe they say, I really want the login button here. And they tell you where it's going to be most accessible for them. And maybe you're not going to put in that exact precise spot, but that it says, okay, it needs to be front and center, and you can arrange it. You're the designer, you can make those decisions, but it's informed by what your customers are telling you. And just these are some of the designs that our participants came up with in that workshop. One of the things that was really powerful was it's really hard to find a winter coat. If you wear a larger size, we live in Canada, it's cold. And a lot of these women couldn't find winter coats, which I find unacceptable. I think that no matter what size you are, you should be able to find clothing that fits you and that feels good. And winter coats are a big problem, evening wear, things, anyway, so that's beyond. So this is all part of the research phase, but once you've collected all these ideas, you've gained this insight from your users, you've got these really deep reflections and experiences. Now you can take all that and you ideate, you start creating your solutions, you draw, you sketch, you write, you think big, think out of the box. Don't think about budget at this phase, just think and really think big. And you can use lots of different tools to do this, just plain old paper. You can go online and use shared whiteboards. There's lots of ways to navigate that. And then once you have some ideas, you're going to select, you're going to narrow it down and figure, okay, what are the ones we want to move forward with? So now you're going to start prototyping. And, prototype is a mock-up or a test version of a design. And you may have heard this phrase, just as a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype is worth 1,000 pictures. Having a physical, fake, test version of your product idea, or if it's a website, a functional test website, wireframe, beyond just the wireframes, but, medium fidelity prototype, so valuable to actually experience that design. Does it work like you had hoped? Does it do what you wanted it to do? Where are there areas for improvement? You can't get those insights just from looking at like a page with a drawing on it. Being able to interact with it is so, so important and is so valuable to finding the solutions and correcting and adjusting your design. And then finally, you are going to test. So once you have your prototype, you're going to test it with your audience. And an important thing to remember is that failure is part of the design process. You're never actually failing until you give up. So failure, I say with a grain of salt, because sometimes things don't work as planned. That's not a failure. That's just okay, we need to pivot. We need to redirect. So go back. Maybe we need to empathize with our user a bit more to meet their needs. Maybe our design has a flaw in it that we can correct. So you're going back through the design process and thinking, what are the stages that we need to address? So there are the five stages again. So empathizing, who is your user? Really, like this, to me, this is the most important part of the process. You cannot do any of the rest unless you have a really, really good idea of who your users are. And then defining your problem, thinking about your how might we statement, really understanding what your motivations are behind your how might we statement. Then you're ideating. What are the things that we can possibly create to solve this problem? Prototyping and then testing, and then jumping back and forth where you need to. So it's iterative, it's cyclical, it's not linear. And I don't know that we have time for this, so I'll just leave this link. You can explore it on your own, but it's design is so powerful, and we're not just dealing with, you know, people having a nice experience on it. It can actually be deadly if it's not done right. This is a wonderful video. I encourage you to watch it. I'll leave the actual clip that I'm talking about. It's one story that she tells in this video. It's so I think that it'll be, yeah. So I'll stop it there. I know that we're almost out of time, so we have about 7 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, or happy to chat.
Thank you, Kristen, so much. The examples are like spot on, and the methods that you've mentioned, some of them honestly are new to me. And I can relate, I can relate to some of them when I've seen them. One of them, to be specific, is the body mapping. So I'm not sure if it's the same thing or not, but I went when I went to the chiropractor or the massage therapist, and they give you sort of a sheet of paper and tells you, like, they have this body map or body image, and they tell you which parts are, which parts do you have pain, or
Yes,
or which ones do you want to attack, do you want help with, something like that. I think it's a really nice idea to have people just scroll down, or just circle down, like, hey, this is where the areas that needs work, or this is where it pains me the most. So I've been confirming, or maybe some of the examples I've experienced, this is maybe derived from this method or something like that. So those have been very interesting examples. Thank you so much. Everyone, so if anyone has a question for Kristen, please go ahead and ask it. We do have about 5 minutes left. One question that honestly have been asked before a lot, and I've seen this a lot, is new user experience designers, most of their experience comes from the UX Google design certificate that was provided by Google. And it's kind of a I would say linear somehow, in which they would tell you exactly the process, like, yes, empathize, and then prototype, and then test. But and then they keep getting confused, like, how do we use design thinking, or how does this fit into the process? And then they think that design thinking is another process. And then the confusion starts to happen, and all these questions pop up. So how would you answer that?
How does design thinking fit into the process, essentially? So I think design thinking is just underlying everything. The idea that, I say it's not linear, but it sort of is, in the sense that you can't get to a prototype that's going to give you any useful information if you don't already know what your users want, what their experiences are. So this is the foundation of all of the design. And I recently, when I joined my current job, I joined a project that had already started without me, and they had already started the designing before we had, really talked to the users and find out. So that can happen. And you sort of have to cycle backwards and be like, okay, well, it's still important to empathize with the people and learn from them, because even though the team has, especially in a big company, the team has started designing, what I learned from the users could be useful as we revise and update the design that they're working on. So it's, I would say, if you're not already using it, just think about where you are in the process. And a lot of these methods or sort of frameworks, they're very similar, they overlap a lot. So human-centered design is an approach. Design thinking is approach. It gives you sort of defined areas to focus in on. And at the end of the day, you need to just be able to adapt it to what you're doing, and you adapt to it as well. There's no, it's not written in stone. It needs to work for you. It needs to work for your goals as a designer, as a researcher. So it's sort of like taking all these things and just thinking through what makes the most sense right now. What do I need based on all of these resources that I have, human-centered design, design thinking, what do I need to do right now that's going to help me reach my goal? And in consulting those to find out what makes the most sense.
Okay, there's one. Okay, Islam had a question here, says, what is your thoughts about Don Norman's article, Why I Don't Believe in Empathic Design?
I actually haven't read that article, so unfortunately I can't comment on it. Do you want to give me a quick summary on his key points? I'd be happy to comment on it.
I haven't read that article too. So Islam, do you wanna like tell us what the article is about and what does it say?
It's talk about the using the term empathy in design is not what I understand from his words in this article. He doesn't agree with this approach. He doesn't agree with using the word empathy in design, or that's what I understand.
Okay, I'm just having a quick scan of the article too. It looks like he doesn't believe that we can ever truly have actual empathy for other people. And I'm wondering if that's because we can never fully put ourselves in the shoes of others. And so maybe and this is me speculating, so this might be incorrect because again, I haven't read it, but there is some truth in that we can never fully put ourselves in the shoes of other people. So if his issue is that we're calling it empathy and we can never achieve this, then I can see how that is sort of can be an area where it's maybe a bit misleading. The goal, I think, though, is to do our best to understand what other people need by engaging with them, by doing immersive research, by, don't give them a survey with scales of 1 to 5. It's not going to help you solve complex problems. If you are solving complex problems, you need to talk to people. You need to go and see what they are doing. He's mentioning homeless people in the article. In the class that I taught this year, one of the student groups, they were designing a product for homeless people, and they went to shelters and they observed and they talked to people, and their project improved so much as soon as they started actually engaging with people. So maybe it's the terminology, but I think it's so important that you get those experiences and understandings of your user.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's main disagrees just with the term. Even when I just started, I had too many difficulties because of just the term empathy. I tried to understand how to get full empathy, so it was difficult at the start.
Yeah, it's a messy process, so it's sometimes hard. I know we have less than a minute left. There's a question at the bottom about having to start over every project. It depends. If you are using the same user group and you have data that you collected from them that can help you answer other questions, not necessarily that you have to start over, but you need to make sure that the information you have is going to help you solve the problem you're trying to address.